topic for this panel is developing an emotionally resilient or maintaining an emotionally resilient ministry. And so we have our three panelists here, the lovely Hayden Walker, the lovely Dr. Cecelia Walker, and Chase Abel. My name is Callie Trombly. I serve as the program assistant at the Global Center here in Beeson. And I also am ordained in the Pentecostal Holiness Church. And I have a background in intercultural ministry and cross-generational ministry. I've served overseas and then in youth ministry contexts as both a youth pastor and a high school teacher. So today we're going to ask these ladies a couple of different questions. Some of them I may throw out to all three of you. Some of them I may just give to a couple of you. And at the end, if we still have time, you're more than welcome to ask questions as well. So first off, why don't each of you share just a little bit about you and your ministry background?
Want me to start?
Sure.
Okay. Hayden Walker, went to Beeson, graduated 10 years ago, served on staff at Mount Brook Baptist here in town for 7 years, did student ministry there, and currently live in Little Rock, Arkansas, at Calvary Baptist now. Serving in a couple capacities there, doing some women's ministry, some young adult ministry stuff, and also teach and preach itinerantly as the Lord allows.
I'm Cecelia Walker. I'm the Executive Director of Chaplaincy and Clinical Pastoral Education for Brookwood Baptist Health System. So we have 5 hospitals and about 4 clinics, I think, in the area. I'm also an associate minister at Greater Shiloh Baptist Church.
I'm Chase Abel. I finished with my MDiv this past December, so I haven't been out of Beeson that long. I have served at Redeemer Community Church. It's a non-denominational reforms church in Avondale for the past 4 years, and I work with college ministry over there, help with some women's ministry things, and yeah, our church is kind of all hands on deck, so we kind of all do lots of random things, but my primary role is college ministry.
Wonderful. Let's begin. So ladies, how do you each process the different emotions that you feel as you minister and care for others? Obviously, part of being an incarnational minister is the emotions that come into that. And then as women, do you think for us, emotions play a different role or a unique role in the way that we minister? Why or why not? And we'll start with you, Chase, and then we'll work our way this way.
So I think it was funny that I should not be up here doing this because I feel like I am in the middle. And maybe that's our whole life, is figuring out what it is to process our emotions, our seasons as we're walking through them. I've served on staff at a church doing primarily relational ministry, so 90% of my job, I'm like one-on-one, face-to-face with college women, hearing about their lives, kind of serving as like a pseudo-counselor minister for them, and so most of my job is really just processing their life with them. And I think so much of processing our emotions is first like knowing the Lord and knowing ourselves and how He's created us individually to process our own hearts, our own souls and spirits. I'm an introvert, so I know that I need a lot of alone time. I don't get a lot of that, so I really have to prioritize that to give myself space to process whatever I'm working through, either personally or with my students, with the church as a whole, my family. And so typically processing emotions for me in terms of ministry looks like when I'm walking out of a meeting with a student, if I have time immediately after the meeting, I have a journal. It's this journal. I keep just a running list of the people I meet with and the date that I met with them, and I just kind of write down the cliff notes of the things that stuck out to me from our conversation, whether that's prayer requests, whether that's things that I don't want to forget that they shared with me, and things that I want to pray for, or things that I feel like I heard them saying as they were talking. I'll try to write those out either immediately after, end of the day, end of the week, so that I can still remember what was shared with me. One, to just like get it out on paper. I process like with a pen. Like I'm a verbal processor, but I first have to process on paper. And so that just helps me like kind of get it out of my system. And I also let that serve as kind of a meditative prayer with the Lord, and kind of offering that person up to the Lord, kind of immediately after I meet with them or within the day or week of meeting with them. That's kind of like a tangible that I do in processing emotions. Other than that, I mean, prayer is huge. Obviously, I don't have to really speak. I don't have to tell y'all that. Y'all know that. And then having accountability and friends in ministry, which I think we'll talk about a little bit later. But accountability in ministry and having relationships with other women and men who are doing relational work has honestly proved probably one of the most pivotal parts of processing and bearing one another's burdens in ministry. So it's kind of how I work through things.
For me, I'm also an introvert, and so I do a lot of journaling and writing, and in chaplaincy and as an educator, most of my work is also one-on-one, and so I keep notes and make notes because for the students, I'm going to have to write evaluations, and I'm going to have information, and I can't remember everything, and then also our engagement sometimes is hard. Some of the things that I share or some of the things that they share are hard to hear or hard things that they're going through. They're dealing with losses, and at our hospital at Princeton, by the time they've gotten to the end of their residency, they've seen more death than most senior pastors see in their career. And so writing and praying, therapy, having a close network of friends that I can't talk about maybe the details of what's going on, but what's bubbled up in me and how I, feel I can be really hard on myself and how I feel that I failed or, how I wish I could have done more, and having that reality barometer in my life, that's been helpful. And when I first came into CPE and I was an intern, one of the things I thought was that I should bracket and hold my feelings outside of myself somewhere or, suppress them. But once I got into CPE, I realized that it helps me to have access and awareness of what I'm feeling so that I can be engaged and relational. Because when I'm spending so much energy trying to suppress my emotions, then I'm not being really present. So that's been something that I've worked on through the years. And so if I'm with someone and they're crying and I genuinely feel like crying, as long as I'm sure that I'm not crying about my stuff and I'm crying because I'm with them, then patients and students appreciate that. But prayer, writing, and journaling, having accountability partners, but therapy, yeah, it's been good.
I forgot to say that. Me too.
Yeah, that's good. I think too, speaking to kind of the emotional, theology of emotion, you look at John 11, you look at Jesus meeting people where they are and meeting them with genuine emotion. But not remaining in that place of weeping and brokenness, but processing through your emotions, and then moving forward in the call and the power of the gospel, to meet people where they are emotionally, and yet to press on with the hope that we do have in Christ. And so I think the challenge, for me at least, is to not to stay in that emotional place, not to let that emotion overwhelm and paralyze from pressing forward into the ministerial calling that God has placed on me.
So as women, do you think our emotions play a unique role in our ministry? And then why or why not? We can go this way.
I do think that they probably do. I think that some of that may be cultural, that we just accept emotions from women more than we do from men. So yes. And then additionally, I think that women ministering to other women have emotional capacity for the particular challenges, losses, pains, processes that other women are going through, that a male pastor, ministry leader, etc., just literally doesn't have the capacity for empathy and emotion towards certain issues because they're not female. And there's some particular issues that we go through as women that I think women have emotional capacity to bear that differently than men.
I too think that we're probably culturally trained to be more emotional, and we can get away with it in a different way, and I think that we can use that to be helpful. But also, because in my work I'm with women and men, and sometimes when I'm working with a male patient or student, I find that that feminine part that God has created helps them to be safer, to be open about those hurting places that they might not do or might not offer because they got to be macho because of our culture. And so I think that when we understand how God has made us and how we're gifted, that it's an asset to be able to use it that way. But I do think that if we raise our boys, or we can, if we're not, if we're old school, we will raise them to be holding their emotions in. And so we get men who are doing that, who are pastors, and thinking that that's okay. In fact, when I first came into chaplaincy, from my teaching and training at Beeson, it was inappropriate to cry in the patient's room. I mean, I got that from my counseling sessions, classes, and things that I took here. And so I was trying to hold it in. And I remember the day that tears started rolling down my face because a teenager was screaming because her mom had just died. And I said, shoot, this is really appropriate. This is how I'm supposed to be. And it delivered me. But all of my teachers had been male. And not disparaging or anything, I'm just simply saying that was my experience. And when I got to the real world, that wasn't effective.
Yeah, I would agree with what both of y'all have said, that I think our culture has really trained the genders for men to live into more rationality and women to live into more emotionality. And I think it was Dr. Bowes here who really helped me, or the counseling professor here at Beeson, who really helped me kind of see the beauty of both, and that our God has created men and women as equal image bearers of him, that Karen talked about, to be equally bearing of emotions and rationality. Like, he didn't just create us for one and men for the other. And I think my experience at Beeson differed a little bit from yours in terms of counseling, because Dr. Bowes was one of you can't sit in a class without him crying. And I think experiencing that from a man was incredibly softening of my own heart towards men in ministry, and just seeing the emotions that they can also carry. And men have emotions and women do too. But I think that the Lord has created us equally but differently. So I do think that we can hold emotions in a different way, but I don't think it's as black and white as our culture has taught us, instructed us to believe. And so I think there's room for us to live into a deeper, Jackie Hill Perry has talked about this, a deeper theology of siblings, where we can really engage with one another as brothers and sisters who are family, who emotes together and who rationalize, think critically together as well. I don't know. I think it's a very multi-layered conversation, but
as we all know, ministry is rarely a 9-to-5 job. So for each of you, are there any particular boundaries that you maintain for your time and your relationships? And then when do you know, or how do you know when to make an exception to those boundaries? Whoever wants to go.
I've recently, in college ministry, email's not a thing for me. So most of my communication happens over text. which is an interesting thing you can't ever turn your emails off either, but I feel like texting is like even more in your face. And it wasn't until this past year where I kind of made a ground rule for myself where I won't respond to student texts past like, I think my phone goes on Do Not Disturb at 6, so that people can see that I might not respond. And then I don't respond to texts past 8-ish for students. That's like one practical like boundary I've drawn. I don't know, for the like when to draw exceptions, that's really hard, and I think it is like so case by case in a lot of ways. I think a lot of times if I have a student call me or someone from the church call me, I typically always answer because I'm not used to receiving calls. So if it's a call, I assume it's an emergency, and I will kind of step into that, even if it's a Saturday, which is an off day, or Friday, which is an off day for me, or after hours. It's a weird world where our job is so relational, and we can't just turn off the relationships. So there is grace to give, but I'm really bad at drawing those boundaries for myself. So it was like just this year that I started like, okay, I just won't respond to a text past this time, and maybe that will draw some sort of time boundary for myself so that I'm not always in this like work mentality. That's just like one practical that I live into.
And the people who know me really well in the room, put your fingers in your ears. I'm not very good at this because the hospital never closes. And having the role that I have over all of these hospitals, it gets really difficult. I'm better at protecting my team and making them them set boundaries and not respond to every callback and things than I am myself. But there are some things I don't like texting anyway. And so I tell my students that if they need to talk to me about something, or my staff, then they need to call me. I'm not responding to every text, and I don't like back and forth. We could say in a few minutes what we need to say if we would just talk on the phone. So for me, that helps my mental health. I cannot stand back and forth texting or even emailing. The things, my time with my family is really important to me, and spending time with them, and so I protect that. And mani-pedis and manicure, massage, if it's on my schedule, I've learned to put things for myself on my calendar as if it were that I was meeting with my supervisor. Because if I don't, then I'm real easy about moving it around. And the other day I was speaking to one of my friends, and he said to me that, in ministry, we're often, we're prone to give. We're just givers. He said, givers have to set boundaries because takers never do. And he said, that's not original with me, but that has resonated with me so much for this last few days that to not feel guilty. And I'm learning not to feel guilty when I say no, and that no is a complete sentence. And I have things like these mantras around me that help me to remind me that, I'm just one human being, and that when the day is over, what didn't happen that day, it can happen the next. I can get back to it. So, but I'm not the best at that.
I'm not either. I do feel like I have gotten better with time and having little boys in my home, and knowing like I'm gonna have to prioritize, these days, these times, they got to go to bed, whatever, of really practical boundaries that have had to be in my life, not because I was good at it, but because they just literally had to happen. And I think a freeing thing for me in approaching boundaries is remembering that I'm not Jesus, and that I am not going to be the savior to anybody that is needing me, and wanting to be available and wanting to be open. And I'm big on opening my home and people come, joining us in the mess, but also recognizing that I'm not going to be able to meet everybody's needs. It's really a freeing thing. Having some boundaries is actually, it frees you up to be able to love and serve fully when you are open and available, I think.
We're going to throw this one specifically to Chase and Hayden. And Chase, you kind of alluded to this, so we'll start with you. So what do friendships look like for you as you minister? Both friendships within your ministry context, so whether that's your coworkers, those under your care, and what do friendships look like outside of your ministry context? And then the real zinger, can you be friends with people that you have spiritual authority over?
So I did allude to friendships in ministry with coworkers. I'm really grateful to work on a staff where so many of my dearest friends are on staff with me. Some of them are here. Getting to co-labor alongside friends is just a really beautiful gift. And I know that that's something that we don't all have, that is maybe unique to some of us. But really pressing into those friendships, I've found, has been one of the most beneficial things in ministry and in work, but also just personally in my life. And so it was like maybe a year or two ago where a couple of us women on staff who are in more relational ministry started doing just accountability every other week before staff meeting. We just get together and process, not like this is what's happening in my ministry with these people, like we wouldn't talk about that, but we would bring forth, I think like you said, the things kind of bubbling up that ministry was bringing, because it is a unique role, it's a unique job, and so many of my dearest friends also don't work at the church, and so they're in the medical world or the business world or in education, and they just can't relate to the same type of burdens that I'm carrying, just like I can't relate to the things that they're carrying. And so having friends on staff who are doing relational ministry, and if you don't have that on your like church staff or your own ministry staff, find that in different churches around the city too, because I'm also have some dear friends who work with college students here on this campus or at UAB downtown and different churches around the city, and getting to have those friendships has truly been such a gift, just to be able to empathize with one another. Regarding friendships with those under my care, college students, that's a funny one. So I started this role as soon as I graduated from college, so it was a lot trickier when I was 22 to draw the boundary of friendship with my students than it is now. And it still can be difficult. I think one thing that I do with my students is I really try, kind of like you said, like to let them in to my life and want them to see the mess of my home and get to know my husband and my community as well. I think drawing boundaries around when I respond, they're aware that I probably won't text them back on Saturday, and that just kind of is a clue for them that there is something a little bit different here. In addition to that, I am really conscious of talking with my students about my own friendships, not in a like a processing my friendships with them way, but in a way where they hear that I have other friends who I am doing communal life with, confessional life with, repentant life with. And I think that is a helpful trigger for them, just of recognizing like, oh, she has her people, I don't need to care for Chase, like she's caring for me. So I think that can be a tricky thing in ministry is it is not as clearly defined as a therapist and a counselee. So getting to do life with my students, hanging out on campus and just cutting up with them on the quad can make the lines feel blurred. And so it's something I'm kind of always balancing. And I've had to have a few conversations with some students just about what the boundary of like, hey, like I really encourage you to go to your people. Like I'm here for you in this capacity, but not in every single one. So that's a place where drawing lines in the sand can be difficult, but it's not always a thick, like bold line. It's often more of a dotted line in ministry, I'm finding. So
I'm going to kind of start there and work backwards. I think that's really wise, Chase, and I think that it changes based on the demographic to whom you're ministering. And I think that there's probably a more clear delineation with children's ministry, student ministry, college ministry than there is when you get into an adult range. I think there's a different delineation there. But at the end of the day, I mean, we look at Jesus. We look at John 15:15.
Yeah.
He calls his disciples friends. Like, there is a friendship relationship, but it doesn't mean that the people to whom you're ministering are responsible for carrying your burdens. I look at people in this room that carry my burdens for me that are my dear, dear friends. Some I've worked on staff with, some that I've not, but I think that you need both. I think that you need people that are, that get it, even if you're on a small staff or if you're a pastor's wife or whatever capacity that you're serving in, you need somebody that understands the perils and the struggles and the pains of your position in your ministry. You need somebody that gets that. And I think you also need somebody that can be a wise voice kind of on the outside, that can speak in wisdom without the kind of emotional embroilment of being in it with you. And so I think both types of friendship are vital, and I think those do have to be separate from the people to whom you're ministering.
I'm going to throw this one to Dr. Walker and then back to Chase, because Chase, again, you kind of alluded to this. Dr. Walker, specifically for you, I know as your students and you are walking floors and things like that, you are, as you said, exposed to so many different things, one of which being death. So does your ministry staff or team have a space to process or discuss how they each individually are doing as they care for others? And then does that help you know when to delegate ministry responsibilities? And then how do you share each other's burdens in the midst of that?
Well, with the students, they have, I have an open door policy anyway. So my students have access to me. We have individual conferences. We have that processing. So what they're doing, they do write weekly evaluations, and I read all of that. And so when they bumped into situations that were really painful and really hard for them, then they can come and process it with me. I'm usually there. This is what boundaries. I'm usually there late. So I come in on the weekends, and when they bump into really scary things, then they can come to me. Or even if it's in the middle of the night, they can call me. If they get triggered or get afraid or whatever, they can call me if they think they don't know how to handle it. And our staff, we meet every morning and process. So whatever has gone on the next day, we're meeting and we're talking about what has happened in our particular hospitals. We have a way of helping each other and, supporting each other. So it's sort of built in, in our process, because we know that we need each other to help us to get through that process. And so even if they're at a different hospital, they can call me, my directors or my chaplains at another hospital can call and get support, and I will go to any of those hospitals as well. So that's how we process.
Yeah, in terms of sharing burdens as a team, my team at our church is smaller. I think there's 3 of us currently on our college team, and the 3 of us are incredibly honest with one another about what we are walking through. We're really honest. We share calendars, so we also can see who is meeting with who when. So we're doing that in a lot of ways so that we can be checking on are you doing 100% relational meetings this week? If so, you're gonna need to take a step back and have some space to pray, to process, to talk with us. We meet with our team once a week, and that's at the beginning of the week, and so a lot of our time together really just looks like prayer, sharing what the week behind us or the week before us looks like, and praying over one another in that, both in one another's individual lanes within the ministry, but then also ministry-wide as a whole, where we're at with our students as a whole. So honestly, prioritizing prayer as a team has been huge, and prioritizing honesty of, our team has developed a lot of safety with one another to where we can, I've had to have moments with my boss in the past, or with my current counterpart of, I'm not okay this week, and I am gonna need to take a step back. Or there have been weeks when one of us has been preaching and the other has had something come up, or that person who was preaching has had something come up, and someone has had to step in, and we really have a open door policy with one another of sharing those burdens when their load is too heavy that week. But to get there, we really have to press into the humility to be honest with one another. And yeah, we pray a lot together. So that's probably the primary way that we carry one another's burdens. It's just taking them to the Lord, like corporately as a team of three, spending time on our knees together.
This one I'm going to throw out to Hayden and Dr. Walker, because I know some of your stories and feel comfortable sharing that part with this next question, but you've both walked through significant seasons of grief. I know, Dr. Walker, that's one reason why you became a hospital chaplain, was some things that you had experienced. So how do you minister to others while you yourself are in a season of grief or acute suffering, or while you yourself are mentally and emotionally processing something?
Go first, Dr. Walker.
Yes, for the reason, one of the things that, reasons I became a chaplain was because my husband died suddenly the week after our 5th anniversary. At the time, I was a librarian, and I was not a minister. But years later, when God called me into ministry and wanted me trained, and I came to Beeson, when I got to the end of it, I didn't know what, I'm Baptist, and I kept reminding God that I'm a Baptist woman, and and so I didn't know what I was going to do, and I thought about the 2 terrible days of my life. My father had died at Cooper Green Hospital, and it was a horrible experience. It was horrible, and they didn't treat us as people should have been treated when they had such a significant loss. Well, my husband died at St. Vincent's, and there was a chaplain who came to offer support. And so I started thinking, well, maybe I could do that. People were always asking me to pray for them at the library and stuff. So I called him up, and he talked to me about CPE and that stuff. And so that's where I started. And just being able to remember how he made me feel and how he supported me and helped me at one of the most difficult times of my life, and that I really wanted to be able to do that for somebody else and be able to be that kind of presence. In the interim, my daughter died in 2006 in a car accident, and 4 years ago, my son died. So when we go back to the question you just asked, my team surrounded me, especially at the library. It was different. People would avoid me because they didn't know what to do. But when you work in a pastoral care department, and then I had people who would, support me, pray with me, help me. And even my students, when Jeffrey died 4 years ago, I stood up to do the eulogy, and I see this band of all these people that I've trained, and supervisors and chaplains from all over the country. That gave me the strength to do what I had to do. So when I'm really vulnerable, there's some days that I come to work and I've thought about or heard a song that reminded me of my children or whatever, and I can come in and I can say, I need you to do this. I need this chaplain to do this. And we're able to be that open and that vulnerable with each other. And that's, how we do it. And I don't want to ever visit a patient and make it about me. And so the one thing I'll leave you with is that one day I went in to teach my students. I was working at UAB at the time, and I walked in and I was crying because the tulips were blooming. And my daughter, the year before, had been talking to the tulips, and she said, go back, it's a trick, because it was seeming warm, but it was going to get cold again, and she knew it. When I saw those tulips, I could not function and teach my class, but instead of them being irritated or whatever, because they were chaplains in training, they prayed with me, they supported me during that time, and so they taught me something about how to be an educator when I have students in my class and they're having real difficult times. I'm able to be compassionate and make time. We can get back to the learning. But that emotion and that heart place that people find themselves in, you know, you got that one chance to be, you know, who you need to be.
A portion of my story is when I was the minister to students at Mountain Road Baptist. I was pregnant with a little girl, a long-awaited little girl. I struggled with infertility and had a miscarriage before. I'm pregnant with this miracle child, you know. And we found out that she was sick and that she would not live. If she made it to birth, that she wouldn't live long outside the womb. And so I carried her for 3 months until she was born. And so that season of those 3 months of, you know, I mean, my goodness, you're pregnant and everywhere you go, everyone's, you know, asking questions about, oh my goodness, you're gonna have a baby. Yes. She's gonna die. You know, it was excruciating to say the least. But I'm on a church staff, I'm a minister. And so I think I got 2 Sundays off the podium after her diagnosis. And I remember that first Sunday. It was the first Sunday I was back at church after her diagnosis. I was on the podium. And I remember like being, okay, Lord, like I'm standing not in my own strength, but in yours. And I just remember walking up there being like, okay, I'm fixing to do the call to worship. And I'm like, I'm about broken myself, you know. I can just remember standing there, Mary, I don't know how long I paused, but I remember standing there and just being like, okay, you know, your grace is sufficient for me. Your power is made perfect in my weakness. Talking about resilience in ministry, it's just this complete reliance that it is Jesus and not me. And so that season of suffering honestly felt like I was suffering in a fishbowl, that my deepest, most painful, horrendous wounds were like everyone was watching it unfold. But it was so beautiful, and that's hard. Undoubtedly, that is hard. But it was so beautiful too because I got to see the church like really be the church and take care of me and nurture me and my husband while she was sick, when she was born, and after she died. And it makes me love the church even more because I've seen how beautiful it really can be. But I think, how did I minister in that season of utter brokenness? It's I had nothing left of Hayden to give anyone. It was just Jesus, and my personal communion with the Lord was just my lifeline. And so I think my ministry continued richly in the season because of Jesus, not because of me. I had a beautiful team around me that supported me really well, and took care of every need, so many needs. But I think a gift, I hope, Lord, please, that season was to that particular congregation, was that like everybody is going to face deep suffering. Everybody's going to. And I think sometimes it's easy to put ministers on a pedestal and be like, you've got it all together. Like you have this, you know, great little spiritual life and have it all together. And that's not the truth. And I hope that a gift of my season of suffering with Zoe was allowing people to see the reality of our faith. My goodness, 30% of the Psalms are lamentation, aren't they? And the reality of faith, like not just like looking good, not being like the little minister on Sunday mornings that has it all together, but like I am walking through the flames and my chin is just barely above the smoke by the grace of God alone. In a picture of, this is going to be you too, congregation. And Jesus will carry you too. As he's bearing me up through this, he will do the same for you. And I pray that is a lasting gift of her life to that particular congregation.
This one will
meaningful throughout to all of you. Dr. Walker, you kind of alluded to it with your mani-pedis. Is there anything you do to give yourself a mental, emotional, or physical break when you're not at work? Because I know, especially not only as women, but as ministers, especially in this season of life, sometimes it can feel like self-care is not something, there's this idea about self-care that can be confusing. Is like, well, I thought I was supposed to be self-sacrificial, but how do I also like have an emotionally resilient ministry where I'm not just surviving, but I'm thriving? So how do you view self-care, and then what are practically some things that you do in that? And we'll start with you.
Well, one of my friends, again, the same friend who gave the other quote, says self-care is not selfish. And I saw it on a billboard a few weeks ago, and I said, they owe you some money. But he's been saying that for years, and it's so true. So in order for me to be able to pour into somebody else, then I've got to spend time being poured into. And so for me, the first thing that happens first thing in the morning is that music is going, my favorite song is Order My Steps is sung, and it's on my ringtone, is everywhere, and it's the first thing that comes on first thing in the morning, and then just gospel music after that, and I'm singing and jumping around, and I'm not even a morning person, but I love to wake up that way. And I've been playing my piano. I bought a piano and couldn't play, and I've been teaching myself for the last 4 years to play the piano, and that's my devotion time, and even in the evening is how I calm myself down when I come in. And I like to ride on my recumbent bike or walk on my treadmill, and again, music is in my ear and I'm listening. Because the whole thing for me is just being able to just reflect on how good God is, and that music does that for me. So I like to create, and so I like to crochet or things like that, and I'm always trying something different. So I'll be in Hobby Lobby, one of my favorite places, and I'll think, I wonder if I could do that, and I'll try doing that. And I like to give those kinds of gifts, those personal, tangible gifts that I made for somebody. So I just think that if we don't take care of ourselves, if we don't take the time to appreciate all that, and it's not about the stuff, it's about the time and our families. I mean, I love being with my family and just spending time laughing about stuff that we did as children. And we can laugh as if it just happened. And then at the end of that, I'm just so grateful that God gave me the family that I have, the opportunities that I have to just enjoy His presence.
I mean, we have to rest. Our God created us pre-fall to work and to rest. Like, those rhythms are woven into the fabric of creation. It's not a rest came because we fell. The Lord was already doing that. So I think there is like an element where we do have to live into self-care and like take care of ourselves. And I think there's such a fad with self-care right now, and I think our culture can, I think self-care for the believer has to look really different than for the non-believer. I think for the believer, a lot of like what self-care looks like is Sabbath, which Sabbath is not just Sundays, as you all know. It's this combination of resting, of worshiping, of delighting in the gifts that the Lord's given us. So a lot of like Sabbathing or resting for me looks like using my hands to create things too. I love to like make things, and whether that's gardening or painting or pottery, like cooking, like I love to create. And I think it's knowing yourself and figuring out the things that give you rest in a way that helps you enjoy the ways that the Lord has given you gifts, the ways that the Lord has created you, or things that the good things that He's given. So yeah, I think we can't pour out, like you said, I think out of an empty cup. So we have to have that time with our people, aside from ministry, to be poured into by them, and to pour into our own people too, not just those that we minister to. I love to exercise, so a part of like self-care or resting or Sabbathing for me is going on walks or runs or jogs or climbing. And I think that's an embodied form of worship, can be an embodied form of worship as well. So I think kind of for me, a lot of like self-care has been framing it in terms of Sabbath, which I listen to a lot of John Mark Comer podcasts, read a lot of his books, and he's working on a spiritual disciplines project right now. And the first 4 podcasts were all on Sabbath, and he divided them up into the categories of stop, delight, rest, and worship, which I think is just a really helpful way to think of Sabbath in a much more holistic sense. So,
That's good. I think of self-care in terms of like recreation, thinking like recreation. How am I recreating who God has made me to be so that I can serve well? I think it's interesting you both talked about creating with your hands and doing things. I also do that. I've taken up sewing, like making something out of nothing. We're living into the image of God when we create. And so for me, self-care is important for me to be creating, doing, making music, whatever it is. But also cultivating friendship is an important part of self-care for me. And being intentional about that, not letting it like be something that fits in the cracks. But it really, spending time with my people is an important part of making sure that I am well. And there's a balance to that. You know, even the Lord, he's spending time with his 3, Peter, James, and John. He's spending time with them, but also he goes away to a desolate place. And that's an important part of self-care for me too, which is hard as a mama of littles, you know, to make the space to be alone with the Lord. But it is vital and is worth it, and it is what fills our cups so that we can pour out.
Just to tack on to that, I once heard it said that if you work with your mind throughout the week, you should Sabbath with your hands. And if you work with your hands throughout the week, you should Sabbath with your mind. So just kind of tacks on to what you guys said. So our last question to wrap up, to make sure that we get you all to the final service on time, to end kind of on a more joyful note. Sometimes weighing the good against the hard in ministry can be difficult, as we all see lots of different hard things as we're walking through people through the nitty gritty and the seasons of suffering and hardness. So how do you intentionally relish and celebrate the good moments in ministry without letting the hard overshadow them?
Go first.
I can. This is really hard for me. I just personally have more of a melancholic spirit. My brother is the like optimist of the family, and I'm the pessimist, and it's just so much easier for me to live into a space of sorrow than joy. And my people know that, and so I am constantly asking my friends to pray for my joy, for me to be able to see the joy that the Lord has given, because I mean, that's the second fruit of the Spirit, like, the Lord has saved us to joy, and that's just a personal, like, weakness of mine, sin struggle of mine, is not seeing or ignoring the joy around me. So I think a lot of, like, this does look like remembering for me that worship, as the Lord has created it this side of eternity, He's given us 2 ways to worship, right? Praise and laments, and living into both of those fully, this side of heaven, because one day we will only be praising, one day we will only be rejoicing and worshiping and joy. And so I think a lot of balancing that looks like living into both. But then also, in terms of the relishing the good, talking about it with my people, like in terms of ministry, talking about it with my team, celebrating the joys that we see, and like consciously like kind of racking those up on a list or throwing them on a whiteboard so we can remember. Like, I think our staff a couple years ago, like literally just had a whiteboard, or not even a whiteboard, a piece of paper with a Sharpie, and we like wrote down all the beauty that we had seen at the church in the past year, and that was hung up in our office so that we could see that. And I think having like tangibles like that, for me, who doesn't naturally run to joy, those things are good for me. And then just creating spaces for fun in ministry, like with our college students, like making sure that we have fun, playful events. Like not always worship services, a lot of those, mostly those, but also a lot of bonfires or a lot of s'mores or like a lot of popsicles in the summer, like doing things that feel playful that kind of bring that out of me. Is helpful.
It's the idea of intentionally relishing or slowing it makes me think of slowing down, and it's how, and I'm one who moves a lot. But at work I write devotions, all for the whole team, and we send them out, and we do this across the system. And what I try to do is in that celebrate the things that are happening in our hospital and praise God for those and keep those before, because in the medical world you're always having these metrics you're chasing, and you can feel like you're never where you need to be. So that's part of me, is to remind my team, the hospital CEO, whatever, of what we are doing well. Often I'll come in the morning and I'll say, even as I get ready to lead them into prayer, reminding them, and I do this to myself every day, you're able to breathe in and breathe out on your own. You're able to ambulate on your own. You looked yourself in the mirror this morning and you knew who you were. And those are things, just those small things that we seem to take for granted. I remind myself of those things, and I'm really intentional about that. And then when things, milestones happen, to take the time to be grateful and in that moment. Because usually, I can graduate and I can do this and I can do this, and then I look back and I hadn't stopped one time to even celebrate. But I've learned to just celebrate those moments and to celebrate the celebrations that people are having in their lives, my staff or whatever, and that gives me joy. But just for me, it's more important to celebrate the things that I can take for granted. And when you work in a hospital and you see people on a ventilator all the time, then you can really appreciate breathing in and breathing on your own. So,
That's a good word. Yeah. This question makes me think of Karen talking about in Proverbs 7, the voice of folly. What did it say? First couple verses. The voice of folly is loud. Like, it is easy to fixate on the hard things in ministry because those voices can feel loud in our head, in our ears, in our hearts. But continuing to not fixate on that, to not fixate on the loud voice of the hard things, but to shift to the true voice of the good things and the work that God is doing, which oftentimes, y'all, it looks like a little seed that's barely sprouted. You got to look at the dirt real close to be able to see. And that's what ministry feels like so often. It doesn't look like the big, evident, lavish thing. And so asking the Lord to give eyes to see what he's doing, how he's at work, and to have peace, fixating on the day of the small things, and not the loud cacophony.